Welcome back to Rabbi's Reflection. I'm so glad that you're joining me today. We'll be continuing to read from Kitchen Table Wisdom. Today's story is titled, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. Enjoy. I never promised you a rose garden. My backyard on the slopes of Mount Tamalpais in Northern California is actually a very small meadow. In the summer and fall of every year, a stag visits at dawn and at twilight. This is quite a thing for someone who grew up in Manhattan. This year he has 6 points on his antlers. Last year 5 or perhaps 4. He is heart-stopping. Actually, I did not plan to have a stag. I planned to have a rose garden. The year after I moved here, I planted 15 rose bushes, gifts from my friends. It was a lot of hard work, but I could see it in my mind's eye, just like in Sunset magazine. The roses bloomed in the late spring, and for a month the garden was glorious. Then the roses started disappearing. Puzzled, I eventually realized that something larger than aphids was eating them and became determined to catch it in the act. Getting up one dawn and glancing out the window, I was transfixed by seeing the stag for the first time. He looked like an illustration from one of my childhood books. As I watched in awe, he unhurriedly crossed the yard, browsed for a while among the roses, and then delicately ate one of my Queen Elizabeths. Every year since then, I have had to make a difficult choice. Am I going to put up higher fences and have roses, or am I going to have a stag 10 feet from my back door? Every year so far, I have chosen the stag. After 2 years of watching each other through a pane of glass, I can now sit outside as he dines. If I tell people this, some say in disbelief, you mean that you are letting this deer eat your roses? Sometimes I will invite someone like this over to watch. One friend, stunned into silence by the sight, said simply, well, I guess we are always doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. I had thought I was planting rose bushes in order to have roses. It now seems I was actually planting rose bushes in order to have half an hour of silence with this magical animal every morning and every evening. One of my patients, a woman with ovarian cancer, told me this. Before I got sick, I was very certain of everything. I knew what I wanted and when I wanted it. Most of the time, I knew what I had to do to get it too. I walked around with my hand outstretched saying, I want an apple. Many times life would give me a pomegranate instead. I was always so disappointed that I never looked at it to see what it was. Actually, I don't think I could have seen what it was. I had the world divided up into just 2 categories, apple and not apple. If it wasn't an apple, it was only a not apple. I had apple eyes. Embracing life is actually a choice. When asked to describe her husband, another of my patients, laughing, tells this story about a visit to Hawaii that has become part of her family's mythology. An organized and frugal man, her husband had reserved compact rental cars on each of the 4 islands months in advance. On arriving on the Big Island and presenting their reservation to the car rental desk, they were told that the economy car they had reserved was not available. Alarmed, she watched her husband's face redden as he prepared to do battle. The clerk did not seem to notice. I am so sorry, sir, he said. Will you accept a substitute for the same price? We have a Mustang convertible. Barely mollified, her husband put their bags in this beautiful white sports car, and they drove off. The same thing happened throughout their holiday. They would turn in their car and fly to the next island, only to be told that the car they had been promised was not available and offered a same price substitution. It was amazing, she said. After the Mustang, they had been given a Mazda MRT, a Lincoln Town Car, and finally a Mercedes, all with the most sincere apologies. The vacation was absolutely wonderful, and on the plane back she turned to her husband, thanking him for all he had done to arrange such a memorable time. Yes, he said, pleased, it was really nice. Too bad they never had the right car for us. He was absolutely serious. What I believe this story is trying to teach us is about our relationship with certainty, and knowing that at the core of it, or at the end of the day, we can't really be certain about anything. Um, how This is the question that I wrote for myself after reading this story. How do we cultivate a sense of humility or openness to what life offers us? It's a really hard question. It's such a hard question to offer an answer to or a response to, because in the moment itself, when you're faced with that challenge, or when you're faced with the stag, the deer, instead of the rose bushes, you can't necessarily respond with a sense of openness. I loved the quote of the first patient that you mentioned, the one who was suffering from ovarian cancer, who talked about how life was apples or not apples. She said, I don't think I could have seen what it was. Right? Even when you're given a pomegranate, which isn't such a bad thing necessarily, but it's not an apple, you can't see it for what it is. So even in the moments when we're presented with something, a challenge, an invitation, something that is not what we want it to be, not what we're certain about, it becomes such a challenge to respond to it with openness, with humility. So I'm curious what your response is to this. Is there a specific moment or a time in your life when you were faced with this that you can remember, a time like this where you were perhaps challenged? Or maybe it's a time when you've realized, kind of looking back at it later, that really you were given something that had an opportunity to appreciate, or an opportunity to really create meaning or purpose from, but in the moment you didn't realize. This is a great story. I think a wonderful message, but also one that I think leaves us kind of speechless. And perhaps maybe that's the response. The response, not a sense of speechless because I have nothing to say, but speechless in that whatever I may encounter, allow me to encounter it first, to see it, to let it kind of absorb into me, before I immediately respond with something, before my kind of certain ways dictate how I act. So let's pause here. I hope that you enjoyed this time of reflection, this time of thinking about how we can reassess things that are certain in our lives, and think about how we can cultivate a sense of humility and of openness to our experiences. Have a great day.